The Blackwood Slasher, Reckoning. Chapter 1, Haunted Memories. The night was still and silent, but within Emily's mind, a storm raged. She found herself once again in the dark, suffocating confines of Blackwood Forest, the screams of her friend Sarah piercing the night. The Blackwood Slasher loomed over Sarah, his blade glinting in the moonlight. Emily stood frozen, terror chaining her feet to the ground, her voice a mere whisper, unable to reach out to her friend who desperately screamed for help. With a start, Emily exploded from her bed, gasping for air, her body drenched in a cold sweat. Her heart pounded against her chest, the echoes of Sarah's screams still ringing in her ears. The room was dark, a small sliver of moonlight sneaking through the curtains, casting long, haunting shadows across the walls. The door to her room burst open, and her mother rushed in, her face etched with concern. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Emily, trying to steady her breathing, nodded weakly. "Yeah, Mom, I'm okay. Just a bad dream," she managed to say, though her trembling voice betrayed her true state. Her mother sat beside her, offering a comforting embrace, but Emily's mind was far away, trapped in the horrors of that fateful night in Blackwood Forest. The next day, Emily sat in the office of her therapist, Dr. Harper, a kind, middle-aged woman with a gentle demeanor. "Are you still having the nightmares?" Dr. Harper asked, her voice soft, yet probing. Emily nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, and the medicine isn't helping. It's always the same, the slasher, the forest." Her voice trailed off, the weight of the memories too heavy to bear. Dr. Harper leaned forward, her eyes filled with empathy. "Tell me about the nightmare, Emily. It's important to confront these feelings." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she broke down, confessing her guilt and helplessness. "I just stood there, frozen. I couldn't save her. Sarah was screaming for me, but I couldn't move. If it wasn't for Anna, I'd be dead too." Dr. Harper offered words of comfort, but Emily's mind was adrift in a sea of guilt and unanswered questions. After the police investigation turned up nothing, not even the cabin, the case had gone cold. Months had passed, and the world had moved on, but for Emily and Anna, the shadow of Blackwood Forest loomed large, a dark chapter that refused to close. "And have you spoken to Anna?" Dr. Harper inquired gently. Emily shook her head, a sense of loss in her eyes. "No. After what happened, she became a different person, always angry, and then one day she moved away. It's like she vanished." As Emily left the therapist's office, she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. The Blackwood Slasher, a ghostly figure from a nightmare, had left an indelible mark on her life. And somewhere, in a place far away, Anna was battling her own demons, the two of them bound by a shared trauma that seemed never-ending. Emily walked aimlessly through the streets of the small town, each step taking her past familiar places that echoed with the laughter and whispers of days long gone. The quaint coffee shop where they used to huddle together, sharing secrets and dreams over steaming cups of hot chocolate, now seemed empty, devoid of the warmth it once held. She paused outside the old movie theater, remembering how Sarah's infectious laugh would fill the air as they argued over which movie to watch. With each memory, a sharp pang of guilt and powerlessness stabbed at her heart. These streets, once pathways to joyous adventures with her friends, now felt like a mausoleum of her past life, a life irrevocably altered by that night in Blackwood Forest. The faces of her friends, especially Sarah's, haunted her, vibrant, full of life, now just shadows in her mind. She wondered if the pain and guilt would ever fade, if she would ever find a way to forgive herself for surviving, for being unable to save her friends. Lost in her thoughts, Emily didn't realize how far she had walked until she found herself standing in front of her house. The building looked the same, yet everything felt different, as if the events of the past few months had cast a shadow over it. She entered the quiet house, the stillness of the empty rooms enveloping her. Her parents were away for work, the normalcy of their lives in stark contrast to the turmoil that churned inside her. Emily yearned for a sense of normalcy, for a moment of peace from the relentless nightmares and memories. As she made her way upstairs, a sudden noise from her bedroom made her heart leap to her throat. It was a soft sound, like something moving. Her mind, still trapped in the terror of Blackwood Forest, imagined the worst. Grabbing a baseball bat from the hallway, she approached her bedroom, her hands shaking, every horror movie she had ever seen flashing through her mind. Emily pushed the door open, gripping the bat tightly, ready to confront whatever lurked inside. But the sight that greeted her was not one of horror, but of surprise. There, sitting on her bed with a small smile, was Anna. "Hi," Anna said softly, her smile tinged with sadness. Emily stood frozen, the bat slowly slipping from her grasp. A myriad of emotions washed over her: relief, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of longing for her friend. "Anna, what are you doing here?" she finally managed to ask, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. Anna's presence in her room, once a common occurrence, now felt like a bridge to a past they both had lost. The reunion was unexpected, but for Emily, it was a glimmer of light in the darkness that had enveloped her life. Chapter 2: A Vengeful Return. In the dim light of Emily's bedroom, Anna's eyes held a depth of emotion that was hard to decipher. The familiar setting, once a backdrop for teenage dreams and laughter, now felt like a crossroads between past and present. "Why did you leave, Anna?" Emily asked, her voice still tinged with disbelief at seeing her friend after so long. Anna's gaze shifted, her eyes reflecting a turmoil that had been simmering beneath the surface. "After that night in the forest, everything changed," she began, her voice steady but haunted. "I was consumed by anger, by a desire for vengeance. I couldn't stay here, surrounded by memories and unanswered questions. I had to do something." Emily listened, a sense of apprehension growing within her. She had seen the change in Anna after the incident, the way the light had dimmed in her eyes, replaced by a shadow that seemed to grow darker each day. "I've been tracking him, Emily." "The Blackwood Slasher," Anna continued, her determination evident in her tone. "I've been gathering information, following leads, anything that could lead me to him. And now, I think I'm close." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of Anna hunting the slasher, of delving back into that nightmare, was terrifying. "Anna, that's dangerous. The police couldn't find anything. What makes you think—" "I have to do this, Emily," Anna interrupted, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "I can't let him get away with what he did. I won't rest until he's gone, until we have our redemption." "What's your plan, Anna?" Emily asked, a sense of dread settling in her heart. Anna leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been tracking patterns, sightings, rumors about him. There's a place, deep in the forest, where he's been seen. I'm going there. I'm going to end this." In the dimming light of the room, Emily studied Anna's face, searching for a hint of the friend she once knew. The intensity in Anna's eyes, the fervor in her voice about tracking down the Blackwood Slasher, was unsettling. Emily's heart was torn between supporting her friend and the gnawing fear that Anna might have lost herself in this quest for vengeance. "Anna, are you sure about this? Going back into those woods? It's what he wants. It's playing into his hands," Emily said cautiously, her voice laced with concern. Anna's expression hardened, her eyes flashing with a mix of pain and anger. "I have to do this, Emily. You don't understand. Every night, I hear their screams, our friends begging for help. It haunts me. I can't let him get away with it. I have to make him pay," she exclaimed, her voice rising with each word. Emily reached out, trying to calm her, but Anna recoiled, a storm of emotion swirling within her. "You think I've gone crazy, don't you? Do you see the police or anyone doing anything? I'm the only one doing something about it." Anna yelled, her frustration and anguish breaking through. Tears began to stream down Anna's face, the facade of anger crumbling as the reality of her pain and fear became evident. Emily gently pulled her into an embrace, holding her as she sobbed. The pain, the loss, the terror of that night in the forest was a wound that hadn't healed. They sat there for a long time, two friends bound by a shared trauma, seeking solace in each other's presence. "He can't cross the water," Anna whispers. Emily didn't say anything and just brushed it off. The night passed with restless sleep for Emily. Her dreams were a tangle of fear and shadows, echoes of Anna's words haunting her. When morning light seeped through the curtains, Emily awoke with a sense of foreboding. The room was quiet, too quiet. She looked around, her eyes searching for Anna, but the room was empty. A sense of panic rose within her. Rushing to the hallway, she noticed that Anna's bag was gone. A cold realization set in: Anna had left. On the nightstand, a note lay folded. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. Anna's handwriting was rushed, but the message was clear: "Don't worry about me. I'll take care of everything. I'll get revenge for both of us." Emily stood there, the note in her hand, a sense of helplessness washing over her. Anna had embarked on a dangerous path, alone, driven by a desire for vengeance that could consume her. Emily knew she couldn't let Anna face this alone, she couldn't lose another friend to the darkness of Blackwood Forest. With a resolute heart and a mind clouded with worry, Emily knew what she had to do. She would follow Anna into the forest, into the heart of their nightmares. The Blackwood Slasher had taken so much from them, she couldn't let him take Anna too. Chapter 3: Into the Shadows. The police station, usually a place of order and calm, was engulfed in a flurry of activity as Emily burst through the doors, her eyes wide with panic. The officers, taken aback by her sudden appearance, watched as she frantically looked around, calling out for the sheriff. Sheriff Dawson, a seasoned officer who had seen his share of troubles in the small town, emerged from his office, his expression turning from curiosity to concern as he saw Emily. "Emily, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice steady yet tinged with alarm. "It's Anna," Emily gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "She's gone into the forest. She's looking for the Blackwood Slasher. She thinks she found where the cabin is." The sheriff's brow furrowed, a mix of frustration and worry crossing his features. He remembered the case all too well, the disappearances, the fear that had gripped the town, and the fruitless search for the elusive slasher. "Emily, we combed those woods for weeks. We never found anything, no sign of this slasher, or any cabin," Sheriff Dawson said, his tone a mix of skepticism and concern. "But she's sure of it, Sheriff. She's out there right now, and she's alone. We have to find her before something happens," Emily pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew the weight of the situation, another young life couldn't be put at risk, not on his watch. He made a quick decision, his years of experience guiding him. "All right. I'll go out there, see what I can find. But I need you to stay here, Emily." "It's too dangerous," he said, reaching for his shotgun and signaling to 3 of his deputies. "No, I have to go with you." "She's my friend, I can help," Emily insisted, determination in her eyes. Sheriff Dawson hesitated, weighing the risks. He saw the resolve in Emily's eyes, the same resolve he'd seen in the face of danger many times in his career. He nodded reluctantly, knowing that her knowledge of Anna and the forest might be crucial. "All right, but you stay close to me. We don't know what we're dealing with out there," he said, a stern warning in his voice. Together, Emily, Sheriff Dawson, and the deputies set out towards Blackwood Forest. The ride was tense, each of them lost in their thoughts, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. As they drove through the winding roads leading to Blackwood Forest, Emily's mind raced with fear for Anna. The trees loomed ominously as they neared the forest, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lay within. Suddenly, Emily spotted a familiar car parked haphazardly on the side of the road. "Stop! That's Anna's car," she exclaimed. They pulled over, and Sheriff Dawson examined the vehicle. In the back seat, he found an open case of bullets, a clear indication of Anna's intentions. His expression darkened. Sheriff Dawson surveyed the area, his experienced eyes scanning for any sign of a trail. "She must have gone in on foot from here. We need to be careful, these woods can be treacherous." "Stay sharp and stay together," he instructed, his voice firm. As they ventured into the forest, the familiarity of the surroundings brought back a flood of memories for Emily. The trees, the sounds, the very air of the forest felt tainted with the echoes of that fateful night. They reached the creek where Emily and Anna had made their narrow escape months ago. Emily remembered Anna's words, whispered in a moment of terror, "He can't cross the water." Emily's mind flashed back to that night, and then she realized what Anna had been trying to tell her. Sheriff Dawson, noticing Emily's hesitation, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her, Emily. We'll bring her back safe." With renewed determination, they crossed the creek, delving deeper into the heart of Blackwood Forest. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential danger. But their resolve was unshaken. They were there to rescue one of their own from the clutches of a nightmare that had haunted them for far too long. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the trees, the forest seemed to close in around them, a silent observer to their desperate search. Somewhere ahead, Anna was facing her demons, and Emily knew they had to reach her before it was too late. Chapter 4: The Trail Deepens. The forest around them seemed to breathe, a living entity echoing with the memories and fears of those who dared to tread its paths. Sheriff Dawson led the way, his shotgun at the ready, his eyes scanning the dense underbrush. The deputies followed closely, their faces set in grim determination. Emily, her heart a maelstrom of worry and fear, kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, praying they would find Anna in time. The light of the afternoon sun filtered weakly through the dense canopy, casting a surreal glow on their surroundings. The beauty of the forest, which once held a sense of wonder and adventure, now felt menacing, each shadow a hiding place for the unknown. As they moved deeper, Sheriff Dawson signaled for them to stop. He knelt, examining the ground. "Fresh tracks," he murmured, pointing to a set of footprints barely visible in the soft earth. "They're going this way," he said, gesturing towards a denser part of the woods. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The tracks could be Anna's. The possibility propelled her forward, her fear for her friend outweighing the terror of the forest and the legend it harbored. They followed the trail, the silence of the forest broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the distant call of a raven. Emily's mind raced with thoughts of Anna, alone and driven by vengeance, walking these same paths. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, a labyrinth of trees and shadows. Time lost its meaning as they continued their search, the fading light casting an eerie pall over the woods. As they rounded a bend, Emily caught sight of something in the distance, a structure, barely visible through the trees. Her heart leapt. Could it be the cabin Anna was searching for? Sheriff Dawson raised his hand, signaling for caution. They approached slowly, every sense on high alert. The cabin, a decrepit structure half swallowed by the forest, loomed before them, its presence a chilling reminder of the tales that had haunted the town for so long. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This had to be it, the place where the Blackwood Slasher had brought terror and death. She could feel a palpable sense of dread emanating from the darkened windows and the weathered door hanging off its hinges. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward, his shotgun ready. "Anna," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Anna, it's Sheriff Dawson. Are you here?" There was no response, only the sound of the wind whispering through the branches. Emily's eyes filled with tears of frustration and fear. Where was Anna? What had she found in this forsaken place? As the search party approached the cabin, a sense of disbelief took hold of Sheriff Dawson. His eyes widened in surprise, a mix of confusion and realization dawning on him. The structure before them, worn and partly reclaimed by the forest, was undeniable evidence that contradicted all his previous beliefs. Emily, noticing the change in the sheriff's demeanor, spoke up, her voice tinged with a mix of vindication and fear. "You see, Sheriff? It's real. Do you believe us now?" The sheriff, still grappling with the sight, nodded slowly. "I don't understand. We searched these woods. How did we miss this?" He looked around, his trained eyes scanning the surroundings as if seeing them for the first time. The group approached the cabin cautiously, the air heavy with a sense of dread. As they entered, a chilling scene unfolded before them. The cabin was as dilapidated on the inside as it was outside, but it was the dark stains on the floor that drew their immediate attention. Sheriff Dawson crouched down, examining the stains. "Blood," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The realization that this place might have been the site of unspeakable horrors sent a shiver down his spine. Emily, standing near the doorway, her face pale, could barely stomach the sight. The faded bloodstains, the buzzing of flies, and the faint, lingering smell of death were overwhelming. She stumbled outside, where she bent over and vomited, the reality of what had happened in that cabin crashing over her like a wave. The deputies exchanged worried glances, their initial skepticism replaced by a growing sense of alarm. One of them stepped outside to check on Emily, while the others assisted the sheriff in examining the cabin for any clues. Sheriff Dawson stood up, his face set in a grim line. "I need to call this in. We need a forensics team here, now." He reached for his radio, his hand steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. The eerie silence of the forest was palpable as Sheriff Dawson, with a look of disbelief etched on his face, attempted to use his radio to call for backup. He raised the device to his lips, but all that greeted him was a burst of static, the crackling sound seeming almost sinister in the quiet of the woods. "Damn it," he muttered, fiddling with the device, trying different frequencies, but to no avail. The radio, usually a lifeline in these remote parts, was useless, offering nothing but static. One of the deputies pulled out his cell phone, his movements quick with a growing sense of urgency. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. "No signal. I can't get through." The others checked their phones too, but the result was the same, no service, as if something was blocking their connection to the outside world. A wave of unease swept through the group, the isolation of the forest suddenly becoming all too real. Sheriff Dawson looked around, his experienced gaze scanning the dense trees that surrounded them. "Something's not right. This area shouldn't be a dead zone. Keep trying the radios as we move. We need to get a message out." Emily, still reeling from the grim scene inside the cabin and the shock of their sudden isolation, felt a chill run down her spine. The silence of the forest, once a natural calm, now felt like a suffocating blanket, heavy with unseen threats. "We need to find Anna," Emily said, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her. "She could be out here somewhere, in danger." In the thickening gloom of the forest, Sheriff Dawson made a difficult but necessary decision. "We need to head back," he said firmly, addressing the group. "It's getting dark, and this isn't a safe place to be after nightfall. We'll come back with more people and better equipment." Emily's protest was immediate. "But Anna could be out here, alone and in danger. We can't just leave her." The sheriff's expression softened slightly, understanding her concern, but his voice remained resolute. "I know you're worried, Emily, but we're not prepared for a night search. It's too risky. We'll return at first light." As he spoke, guiding Emily back the way they had come, a sudden, blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It came from one of the deputies who had been trailing slightly behind. The group spun around wildly only to find the deputy on the ground, writhing in agony. Rushing to his side, they saw the horrific sight. His leg was caught in a vicious bear trap, the metal teeth clamped down hard, blood seeping onto the forest floor. "Damn it, hold on!" Sheriff Dawson barked, as he and another deputy worked to pry the trap open. Emily, despite her own shock, sprang into action, her nursing skills kicking in. Once the trap was released, and the injured deputy was freed, it was clear that his injury was severe. Unable to walk and with night rapidly approaching, the sheriff made a quick decision. "We need to get him to shelter," he said, eyeing the cabin. "We can't risk moving him far in this condition." With effort, they carried the deputy back to the cabin, the same place they had sought to leave. Emily, with a grim determination, began to tend to his wounds. She cleaned the gash as best as she could with the limited supplies they had, her hands steady even as her mind raced with worry for Anna and their predicament. The cabin, once a place of horror, now served as a crude sanctuary against the dangers of the forest at night. The deputies helped make the injured man as comfortable as possible, while Sheriff Dawson stood at the window, peering into the darkness. "First light, we'll get him out of here and continue the search for Anna," the sheriff said, more to himself than anyone else. His gaze was troubled, the weight of their situation heavy upon him. Emily sat beside the injured deputy, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window. Outside, the forest was a black wall, impenetrable and unforgiving. The reality of their isolation was stark, cut off from the outside world, in a cabin that held grim secrets, with an injured man and a missing friend somewhere in the vast wilderness. As the minutes passed and the darkness fell, the group settled into a tense vigil, each lost in their thoughts, the silence broken only by the occasional groan of pain from the deputy and the unsettling sounds of the forest at night. Emily's thoughts were with Anna, hoping against hope that she was safe, and with the unseen menace that lurked in the shadows of Blackwood Forest. Chapter 5: Perilous Journey. The tension in the cabin was palpable as one of the deputies, a young and determined officer named Harris, volunteered to navigate the treacherous woods back to the car. His proposal was met with a mix of admiration and concern, especially from Sheriff Dawson. "It's too risky, Harris," the sheriff argued, his voice laced with worry. "These woods are dangerous, especially at night. We don't know what's out there." But Deputy Harris was resolute. "Sir, we need help. We can't just sit here with an injured man and no way to call for backup. I can make it. I know these woods." After a moment of tense deliberation, the sheriff reluctantly agreed, but not without conditions. "All right, take Jenkins with you. 2 is better than 1 in this situation. And be careful, both of you." The second deputy, Jenkins, nodded, his expression serious but determined. They quickly prepared for the journey, checking their flashlights and securing what little first aid supplies they had left. Before leaving, Harris turned to Emily, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll be back with help. Stay safe here." Emily nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety. "Be careful," she whispered, watching as the 2 deputies disappeared into the enveloping darkness of the forest. Now in the cabin, only Sheriff Dawson, Emily, and the injured deputy remained. The sheriff took up a vigilant watch by the window, his shotgun at the ready, while Emily sat beside the injured deputy, doing her best to keep him comfortable. As deputies Harris and Jenkins ventured into the dark forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, a conversation unfolded between them, one marked by growing unease and the weight of the unknown. "You really think there's something to all these slasher stories?" Jenkins asked, his voice low, an undercurrent of skepticism mixed with apprehension. Harris, navigating the path ahead, kept his gaze fixed on the shadowy forest. "I don't know what to believe anymore. After what we saw back at the cabin, I'm starting to think there might be some truth to it." Jenkins, glancing over his shoulder into the dark recesses of the woods, shivered slightly. "Yeah, that blood. And no signal out here. It's all a bit too strange. I've heard the stories since I was a kid, but I never really believed them. Now, though, Making their way through the treacherous terrain, they were keenly aware of every sound and movement around them. The oppressive silence of the forest seemed to amplify the smallest noises, adding to the tension that hung in the air. Suddenly, a rustling sound from the bushes brought them to an abrupt halt. Harris, with practiced caution, signaled for silence, his hand moving closer to his sidearm. They stood motionless, ears straining, hearts pounding in the quiet of the forest. After a tense moment, a small deer emerged, its eyes briefly reflecting in the flashlight's beam before darting away into the darkness. Harris, relieved but still on edge, released his grip on the gun and let out a short laugh, more out of relief than amusement. "Fucking deer nearly gave me a heart attack," he exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. Jenkins, trying to mask his own spike of adrenaline, let out a soft chuckle and nodded, gesturing for them to continue. "Yeah, just our luck, huh?" They continued on, the weight of their mission pressing heavily upon them. The responsibility of reaching the car and calling for help was a burden they both felt keenly. As they pressed on, the oppressive silence of the woods seemed to amplify their fears. Every rustle, every shadow, became a potential threat, the legend of the slasher casting a long, dark shadow over their minds. It was in this heightened state of alertness that the ambush came. Silent and swift, a figure emerged from the darkness, its movements almost ghostly. Before Jenkins could react, Harris was struck down, a victim of a brutal, unexpected attack. Harris, choking on his own blood, fell to the ground, his flashlight dropping and rolling away, casting eerie shadows around them. Jenkins, paralyzed with shock, only realized what had happened when he turned to find his partner in his final moments. The terrifying reality of their situation crashed down on Jenkins. The Blackwood Slasher was no longer just a story, he was a deadly, living nightmare, and Jenkins was now face to face with him. As the figure lunged at Jenkins, the scene plunged into darkness, the fate of the second deputy swallowed by the night. Back at the cabin, Sheriff Dawson stood guard at the window, the injured deputy and Emily huddled together, unaware of the tragedy unfolding in the woods. The sheriff, looking out the window, spoke softly, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "You brave, Emily. Coming back into these woods, after everything. It takes a lot of courage." Emily, sitting beside the injured deputy, looked up, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and resolve. "I had to come back. For Anna. She would have done the same for me." Sheriff Dawson broke the silence, his voice low and contemplative. "Emily, when we get out of here, I promise you, we're going to do everything we can to find Anna and get to the bottom of this. No one should have to go through what you girls have. I'm sorry that I ever doubted you girls." Emily looked up, meeting the sheriff's gaze. There was a depth of sincerity in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means a lot." Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible knock at the door cut through the stillness. It was so weak and unexpected that at first, they weren't sure they had heard anything at all. The sheriff and Emily exchanged a tense look, the same question in their eyes: could it be one of the deputies? Or was it him? Sheriff Dawson moved slowly towards the door, his shotgun at the ready. His movements were cautious, every sense heightened in anticipation of what might be on the other side. The injured deputy, despite his condition, tightened his grip on his sidearm, ready to provide backup. With a deep breath, Sheriff Dawson reached for the door handle. He opened the door slowly, peering into the darkness outside. The sight that greeted them was beyond their worst fears. Deputy Jenkins stood there, swaying slightly, his uniform drenched in blood. His eyes, once full of life and determination, were now glassy and lifeless. Before anyone could react, he fell forward into the cabin, revealing the large axe embedded in his back. His body hit the floor with a heavy thud, a finality that echoed in the small cabin. Panic ensued. Emily screamed, stepping back in horror. The injured deputy, despite his pain, raised his weapon, scanning the doorway for any further threat. Sheriff Dawson, his expression a mix of shock and rage, stepped over Jenkins' body to peer into the darkness outside, but there was no sign of the assailant. The reality of their situation hit them with brutal clarity. The Blackwood Slasher had claimed another victim, and they were trapped in the cabin, cut off from the outside world, with a killer lurking in the woods around them. And the chilling aftermath of Deputy Jenkins' sudden and gruesome appearance at the cabin door, Sheriff Dawson's initial reaction was one of shock. But as he stared down at the fallen deputy, his shock quickly transformed into a mixture of fear and an overwhelming sense of duty. With a resolve born of anger and a deep-seated need to protect those under his care, Sheriff Dawson stepped outside, shotgun in hand. He tried to calm his racing heart, his eyes scanning the dark forest for any sign of the Blackwood Slasher. The night was eerily still, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a ghostly mask, barely visible among the trees. His heart skipped a beat, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. But he quickly steeled himself, channeling his fear into determination. Without hesitation, he raised his shotgun and fired in the direction of the fleeting apparition. The blast echoed through the forest, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence. Stepping forward, he hoped, perhaps even believed, that he might have hit the elusive figure. Inside the cabin, Emily, who had been tending to the injured deputy, stood up abruptly, drawn to the window by the sound of the gunshot. "Be careful," the deputy whispered hoarsely, his eyes reflecting both concern and fear. Peering out, Emily saw Sheriff Dawson advancing cautiously towards the forest. Her heart was in her throat, fear gripping her as she watched him move into the darkness. Then, in a heart-stopping moment, Sheriff Dawson stepped into a hidden bear trap. The sharp metal jaws clamped down on his leg, eliciting a scream of agony. His shotgun fell from his grasp, landing with a thud on the forest floor. From the shadows of the trees, the Blackwood Slasher emerged, his blade gleaming menacingly in the moonlight. In one swift, brutal motion, he decapitated the sheriff, his head rolling grotesquely towards the cabin. Emily screamed, horror-stricken at the nightmarish scene unfolding before her. The slasher began advancing towards the cabin, each step a measured movement of impending doom. The injured deputy, realizing the imminent danger, yelled at Emily, "Shut the door! Now!" Panic-stricken, Emily rushed to the door, but her efforts to close it were thwarted by Jenkins' lifeless body blocking the way. She struggled desperately, pushing against the weight of the fallen deputy, but the door wouldn't budge. The slasher was getting closer, his presence a looming shadow of death. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. The distance between the slasher and the cabin was closing rapidly, each second bringing him nearer. Emily's eyes were wide with terror, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. The injured deputy tried to raise his weapon, but his injuries and the angle made it almost impossible to get a clear shot. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a trap, with the Blackwood Slasher closing in and the night bearing witness to a terror beyond imagination. Chapter 6: The Face of Fear. The night air was heavy with tension as Emily watched the Blackwood Slasher approach, his gait slow but unrelenting. Each step he took was a heartbeat in Emily's ears, the distance between them shrinking with agonizing inevitability. The injured deputy, his face etched with pain and determination, struggled to aim his weapon. "Emily, get back," he managed to grunt, his voice strained. But his efforts were hindered by his injuries, the angle awkward and his aim uncertain. Emily, her back against the wall, felt a terror unlike anything she had ever known. The slasher was now mere feet away from the cabin, his ghostly mask a symbol of the nightmares that had haunted her since that fateful night in the forest. As the slasher reached the doorway, his blade raised for a deadly strike, the injured deputy made a final desperate attempt to protect Emily. He fired his sidearm, the gunshot ringing out sharply in the confined space of the cabin. But his aim was off, the bullet whizzing past the slasher and disappearing into the night. The slasher paused, his head tilting slightly, as if amused by the deputy's attempt. Then, With a swift, fluid motion, he kicked Jenkins' body aside, clearing the path to the door. Emily's scream was trapped in her throat, her body frozen in sheer terror. In that moment of paralyzing fear, Emily's thoughts raced. Her survival instincts kicked in, her mind frantically searching for a way out, a way to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before her eyes. The slasher stepped into the cabin, his presence dominating the small space. The deputy, realizing the futility of his actions, dropped his weapon. In response, the slasher moved with a terrifying swiftness, closing the gap between them. The deputy's eyes met Emily's in a final, silent goodbye before the slasher's blade ended his brave but futile resistance. His lifeless body slumped to the floor, adding to the grim tableau of the cabin. Emily, witnessing the brutal end of the deputy, felt a surge of primal fear. Her mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to flee. She turned and dashed towards the back of the cabin, where a small window offered a glimmer of hope. Reaching the window, Emily frantically tried to open it. It was stuck, but adrenaline lent her strength, and with a desperate effort, she managed to force it open. Without a moment's hesitation, she climbed through, tumbling out into the night. Behind her, the sounds of the cabin and the slasher faded into a muffled chaos. Emily hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her body, but she forced herself to get up and run. The forest around her was a labyrinth of shadows and unknown dangers, but the terror of what lay behind her propelled her forward. Branches whipped at her face, roots threatened to trip her, but she kept moving, driven by a primal need to survive. As she ran, her mind was a whirlwind of fear and desperation. The night around her was alive with the sounds of the forest, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the echo of the slasher's footsteps in her mind. Emily's flight through the forest was a blur, the trees and darkness merging into a terrifying journey with no clear destination. But one thought kept her moving, one burning need to survive, to escape the horror of the Blackwood Slasher. Chapter 7: The Final Confrontation. Emily's desperate escape through the dense Blackwood Forest was a race against death. Her lungs burned, and her legs ached, but the fear of the slasher just behind her fueled her flight. In a moment of misfortune, her foot snagged on a protruding root, sending her sprawling to the forest floor. The slasher, a dark silhouette against the night, closed in, his blade glinting ominously under the moonlight. Just as he raised his weapon to strike, a thunderous blast echoed through the woods, halting his deadly intent. Emily, dazed and disoriented, looked up to see Anna, standing defiantly with the sheriff's shotgun in hand. Her face was a mask of fury, her eyes burning with a mix of vengeance and pain. Without hesitation, Anna unloaded the shotgun at the slasher. Each shot reverberated through the forest, a testament to her wrath and determination. The slasher staggered with each hit, finally collapsing under the relentless assault. Emily watched, frozen, as Anna approached the fallen slasher. Her steps were measured, her shotgun still aimed at the motionless figure on the ground. She stood over him, her breathing heavy, her gaze unyielding. With a swift kick, Anna nudged the slasher's body, ensuring he was truly incapacitated. Satisfied, she turned to Emily, her expression softening slightly. "Yeah, he's dead. Just like I said he would be," Anna said, her voice carrying a weight of finality. For a brief moment, they shared a nervous chuckle, a momentary release from the horror and tension that had gripped them. But the respite was fleeting. Emily's laughter turned to a scream of terror as she saw the slasher rise behind Anna, a nightmarish figure defying death. Anna, realizing too late the danger, turned just as the slasher's blade pierced her chest. Her eyes met Emily's, filled with shock and a silent apology, before she fell to the ground, lifeless. Overcome with shock and grief, Emily could only stare at Anna's body for a moment before survival instinct kicked in. She turned and fled into the forest, the slasher in pursuit. Emily's desperate dash through the forest led her to the creek, the same boundary they had crossed once before. As she stumbled across the water, a memory flashed through her mind, Anna's words about the slasher's inability to cross. On the other side, Emily turned to face her pursuer, her fear momentarily replaced by a flicker of hope. The slasher stood at the water's edge, his expression inscrutable behind the mask. Breathing heavily, Emily taunted him, her words a mix of defiance and desperation. "You can't get me here, can you? I know your weakness now. I'll come back, burn down your cabin. Know your forest. I will find a way to kill you." The slasher remained silent, his gaze fixed on her. Then, with a swift, unexpected motion, he hurled his blade across the creek. Emily barely had time to register the action before the weapon struck her, its impact forceful and final. She collapsed to the ground, her life slipping away as her vision dimmed. The forest around her fading into silence. Her nightmare had ended, but at a cost too great to comprehend. As Emily lay motionless by the creek, the slasher turned and disappeared back into the depths of the forest, his legend and terror remaining unsolved, a dark and haunting mystery of Blackwood Forest.